I'd mentioned this briefly when we were talking about the tool, and the idea was like, how do you start thinking about these metrics and this framework beyond debt recovery, even beyond choice making necessarily, right? But just stripping away that use case and looking at court performance data and how that might apply in different cases. And for a second, I just want you to imagine that we didn't have the tool that I showed you, and you had some sort of a platform that had maybe just these metrics, right? Average time for disposal from filing date, average number of hearings until disposal, things like that. Just these 4 or 5 metrics, but tagged with various jurisdictions, various benches, and be able to do some filtering and then use that in different ways. So imagine that tool existed before, or that platform existed before we created the tool that we discussed pre-lunch. What would that have looked like, right? You might go to that sort of a platform and say, my jurisdiction is Bombay, and the benches I'm looking at or the courts I'm looking at is the Bombay HC, NCLT, and DRT, right? And it might give you a table something like this, right? So you can see some of this data. This is where we kind of started from while we were working on this prototype and coming to an understanding about what the framework is, what that entails. The question we asked was, how does this sort of a data, even if you disaggregate it, you don't always have to see all of this data together in any particular use case. How is that applicable in vastly different situations and in very different formats, right? So website where you put a few questions, it's all in English. You have a certain understanding of the law, let's say, of process. You might use it in a certain way, but how do you kind of then say that if you have this data available or this process of getting to the data available, how are other organizations, other individuals going to use that? And at that point, we reached out in the larger sort of Agami community, and so we have two of those partners with us today, and then the all of us sort of work together to imagine some scenario. So we don't have another tool or prototype, but it's more of a story, right? And we want to share a couple of these stories with you to show slightly different formats, different types of litigants and cases, to hopefully open the conversation around what could we do with this data, right? And so just want to, before we start sharing Asif's story, I just want to invite Mohit from Project Second Chance to just share a brief kind of description of the work that they do and maybe a little bit about Asif.
Hi, am I audible? Yeah, so I'm Mohit. I am based in Delhi. I'm founder of a non-profit called Project Second Chance. We started working with this idea that how we can reimagine prisons in India. So what we realized that okay, prisons as a social justice issue has not been they are not super specialized institutions or leaders working in this space. So how can we actually build more leaders, build more institutions? So what we do is we identify prisoners who are in the prison, and we somewhere work with them. Identify some reformed prisoners who have passion to change the system, and they join us full time once they get released. So they actually join us for two years of fellowship, and they curate new kind of interventions which are required, new kind of programs which are required to be done, specifically keeping for marginalized prisoners. So I'll give you an example of this one person, Rahul, who's one of our fellow, was in prison for 5 years. He comes from a Sasi community. Sasis are basically who have been generationally making alcohol. It's a caste, and which always had a conflict with law, in the history. And when he was in the prison, he was not able to get a quality lawyer for almost 3 years. So now once he came out, he has built like hundreds of pro bono lawyers with help of I pro bono and other agencies, and they are providing counseling to marginalized lawyers. So they start institutions and they further take it, and we incubate those things. And Asif is one of the person who basically Rahul's team was supporting when he was in the prison. And I would love if you can talk a little bit more about Asif.
So Asif, he's about 23 years old. He's from Bihar. He was working in a factory in Delhi, but some violence broke out, and one of the managers was murdered. And he was arrested when he was fleeing the spot. He's been in prison for 2 years. At this point in the story, he's not. He's been very withdrawn. He's not engaging much with what happens in the prison or with the other prisoners. But Project Second Chance was conducting some outreach programs, some training programs in the prison where Asif was incarcerated. But he was only like listening or seeing what was happening, but he wasn't really engaging with it. He was kind of staying away from whatever was going on. Asif's family, they were dissatisfied with that court-appointed lawyer. They didn't think that person was doing a great job, and what they did was engage with a private lawyer to help Asif apply for bail. But that lawyer was barely meeting with them. They were hardly able to get FaceTime. When there was a hearing in the court, they would be waiting there, and lawyer was just flying by. They would barely get any time with him. Meanwhile, Project Second Chance was using this platform and the processes that it talked about to scrape data from various courts in Delhi, which were relevant to the prisons that they work in. And what they were trying to do was understand what happens in these courts, how the proceedings go, how many hearings, things like that. But what they did with that data was prepare small booklets and pamphlets, right, around the kinds of issues the inmates they work with find relevant, right? And like everybody else in the prison, one of these pamphlets was handed over to Asif as well. And Asif started engaging with the program through that pamphlet. He didn't want to engage with the people necessarily. And then when he started looking at the information about the cases, about the courts, he starts thinking about the charges that were filed against him, right? And he checks the data related to that, right? Around bail hearings and things like that. And what he realizes is, because the pamphlet tells him that if a bail application had been made, he should have gotten a copy of that. He hasn't gotten that copy. So then he starts questioning whether an application was made like the lawyer was claiming. And what he realizes is that maybe the chances of him getting bail might be a bit higher. He realizes other people who were implicated with him in that case have gotten bail. So he should also have gotten bail by now. And that hearing should have happened, right? The number of hearings, the time for the first hearing for bail hearings in the court where his case is a lot shorter than what he's been in prison for, right? So he decides to confront his lawyer. So he tells his family, gives them the booklet, says, point to this part and tell the lawyer that right now hearing should have happened. Where is the copy of the bail application? Lawyer doesn't take it their word seriously, kind of brushes them off. Are you the lawyer or am I the lawyer? Do you know how this works or do I? Right? Don't waste my time. That motivates Asif to then reach out to the Project Second Chance team and work with the database put together by Rahul, and through that network finds a vetted lawyer who takes these sorts of matters more seriously and then supports Asif through that process. So this is one way in which we looked at this data, and we looked at some very just one or two metrics, right? Here, this is not about making choices around what court, right? Our idea here was that somebody who's in Asif's situation suffers from a massive amount of information asymmetry. Data like this made accessible to them could then give them some agency, some information to be able to start taking charge of their situations. The interesting process for us in this was to say that, sure, the data is dynamic, it is being scraped, analyzed, it is being accessed through APIs maybe, but that's not how the end person needs to access it, right? So then when we're saying what is the litigant centric view around the court performance data, we should also think about what are the appropriate technologies right, or formats that make sense for the litigants who we're trying to work with. And the idea of working with something like this was to not settle for an easy technology solution, but to say, in Asif's situation, if you really put yourself in those shoes, what is going to be accessible? And what is Asif, for example, going to be able to carry with him when he's taken to court, right? Not going to get access to, if there is a functioning computer lab in this prison, he's not going to have access to that. But a small pamphlet, he can keep that in his pocket when he goes. And then use that to point to the lawyer, because that's where he meets the lawyer. The lawyer's not coming to the prison to meet him, right? And that's how we kind of constructed this story. I'll just pause here, Mohit, if you have anything you'd like to add. Or
I think what we could say when we were working on this, we had people from our team who have gone through these issues and coming from those marginalized communities. Their fundamental what they were sharing is that what we need is something which can give us some idea about the system. We are so clueless when we are part of the system, and our families are so clueless that if we have anything which can help us navigate with the system, it helps. So, but it should be designed in a way that we can navigate that. So that was something which came out
yeah,
over that, and I also feel that what happened during when we were working on this, that Asif and Abi, finally Asif is out when we are working with him. We realized that it is not just about how it should be done. It should be also, there should be follow-ups of something like this, because what was happening every time we were talking, they were coming to us because now they got a hope. They see something. Oh, there's somebody who can actually at least giving us some ray of hope. So what can, so the follow-ups also is something which is crucial.
yeah. And I think this reality check we got from Mohit's team, right, who have been in that situation, really helped us think about the reality of a scenario like this, and then how to design for that. I'm just going to share one more story that we created like this. Again, we were trying to push ourselves to say what's again a different format. And for this one, we worked with the Nyaaya team. So just want to invite Yashaswini to give a brief intro to Nyaaya.
Hi everyone, I'm Yashaswini, and at Nyaaya we are an open resource. We used to be a digital resource, but now we are happy to say we are working more towards the last mile. It's an open access resource which contains simple and actionable legal information, which is explained in what we call subtle format, which is simple, accessible, reliable, and actionable legal information. In right now, English, Hindi, and Kannada. We would want to expand to other regional languages to capture the context. And here we do this by creating legal explainers in multiple formats: text-based, audio, video, and the idea is to enable anyone above the age of 14 understand what their legal rights are and then enforce or action upon it using the tools that's available. These contain like a list down of all verified resources to navigate the justice system. And we have been incredibly mindful of the fact that okay, there is the legal information, but always questions around what to do next comes in. So the first pivot was in 2021 during the second wave of COVID, when we were getting questions from our individual sort of groups and networks. In 2021, we were getting questions regarding legal rights related to, admissions in the hospitals, release of dead bodies, compensations, and we immediately wanted to reach out to those answers and those people through. So we sort of launched a WhatsApp based helpline called Ask Nyaaya, which is now running as it's not a framework yet, but basically we get questions on our WhatsApp number and we respond to them again in the subtle format, give them links to the explainer and resources. And the last, the most recent pivot towards working towards the last mile was the launch of a district lawyers fellowship in Karnataka called Samvidhan Fellowship, where we support 7 district lawyers right now who provide this sort of navigational handholding support at a very granular, localized level in these 7 districts of Karnataka. But that the sum of the work, that's the sum of the work we do. But basically what resonated with our conversations, Akshay, was the fact that we are trying to tell a story which can be a pro forma or like a nudge for any litigant to pursue justice and be encouraged to understand what their legal rights are. So I think this China story will sort of throw light about how we can go ahead.
Super. Thank you so much. I think just want to say that uh, before we started working on this project, we'd had some conversations with the Nyaaya team about how they're thinking about their WhatsApp chatbot, and some conversations with the Jugalbandi team as well. Because the volume of questions that they were getting and to be able to answer that manually was a tough thing. And of course, a lot of excitement post summit about the use of large language models. So in the story, we're assuming that the chatbot is functioning to a certain extent with those models, and a little bit of our understanding of what appropriately, how appropriately you can kind of design chatbot experiences. The idea here is that if we imagine that you have this platform which has all this data, it makes available to, say, a Nyaaya who is building and maintaining and designing a, a chatbot to be able to pull the data from this API and bring that into that conversation that a person is asking their questions to this chatbot. How do they bring that data in? So it's again a small part of a much larger process of uh, building confidence for this person, giving them that information, that awareness. So Shaina is an IT employee. She's the first girl in her family to secure a job in the big city. She's not happy at her workplace. Her colleagues are super competitive, and her one of the managers has been making snide comments about her for a long time. So she's really struggling at this workplace. So she finds this platform called Confide In. It's a space where anonymously you can share questions, you can vent, and the community, which is also anonymous, is able to support you with ideas or just an open space to kind of hear you out. And because of all that input and that open space to share, she's feeling a lot more confident in her workplace, and it's been a big boost for her. So she continues using that platform. But one night she receives a DM from an unknown account, right, on one of her social media handles, claiming to know who she is and sharing screenshots from the messages that she's posted on Confide In. And they threaten to reveal her identity and her comments to her employers. She could be in big trouble if they do that, and they start harassing her in the DMs using that information. They also send those messages on her WhatsApp. They follow her from social media onto WhatsApp. So it's no longer on Confide In's platform. It's followed her into her personal space. So she knows that they've identified and made that connection. She doesn't know what to do. She's stuck. If her identity is revealed, she's going to lose her job for sure. And she doesn't know if she should approach the police. She doesn't want to get into that. She's heard horror stories about approaching the police, getting stuck, and nothing really happening, especially when it comes to things like harassment and bullying, right? So she's worried about that. She doesn't want her parents to find out. One day, she's scrolling on Instagram over lunch and she finds out about the Ask Nyaaya chatbot. So she decides to try it out. It's an anonymous space. Nobody's going to find out who she is, maybe. And what she does is she logs on to the chatbot, and the chatbot asks her a few questions. And by asking her a few questions, it understands what broadly the issue is. And it gives her a synthesis of some of the legal explainers available on the Nyaaya platform around what is it. Oh, you're a victim of cyber threat and cyber stalking, right? How it applies in Indian law, what is the sort of relief possible, things like that, right? She feels like she finally understands what is going on, right, or what she could potentially do. What it then does is the chatbot helps with suggesting some frequently asked questions. When somebody is in a situation like this, what are the sort of questions they ask? right? So what kind of support can she receive as an individual going through this issue? So she sort of selects one, and it shares that, you know, in X percentage of cases of cyberbullying, a certain percentage of complainants were offered compensation. It tells her what some of these judgments have been, right? And of course, these numbers are indicative. We're just kind of trying to show potentially what could happen over here. And it says that you can also seek police protection. So it tells her what steps she can take and how she can go about seeking that police protection. But then what it does is she also asks, how long will this take to get resolved? Like cases like these, how long do they take? And it gives her that data, right, from multiple courts in her state, right? So it gives her some sort of an average. So she's able to build a picture. I think it was mentioned in one of the conversations before this, what is the next year going to look like, right? It tells her that if she chooses to go down this path, what could potentially happen. Because of all that information, she feels more confident about what she needs to do next. So she goes to the cyber cell portal and she lodges a complaint. She also, because of the bot, realizes she doesn't have to walk into the closest police station necessarily. She can do it online. It's a safer kind of way of doing it. So that's how Shaina gets that confidence, gets the right information to be able to do something about this issue she was facing. Again, over here, I just want to highlight how the organization is doing a bunch of things. They're providing a whole bunch of resources. This sort of court performance data is but a very essential addition to that whole knowledge that's being shared and things like that. Like Mohit said, follow-ups are important. In this case, the legal explainers, breaking it down, making it accessible in a format that makes sense is important. But then if we don't have this data about how long is my case going to take, how many hearings is it going to be, right? That you stop short of giving a lot more information that makes it very real. So those were two of the stories that we kind of worked with. The idea here was to use these stories as a way to say that that framework that we saw in the morning, that has a certain application for debt recovery, for choice making, right? Through that tool, which is a functioning tool with real data. But then can we go beyond that? Can we think about that framework, those metrics, more of the metrics that you mentioned, but then how they apply to the context that you work in, right? Or that others work in for these very specific types of litigants who have very specific types of matters that they are dealing with. So I'll just pause here